Rah, 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 go team! Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for A Private Little War, which is episode 16 of Season 2 of Star Trek The Original Series. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review every episode of Star Trek The Original Series, one episode at a time. In this video I cover the episode A Private Little War. So Private Little War sees Kirk visit this pre-warp civilization that apparently he had lived at before and made friends with one of the tribesmen there. However, when they go there, they find that their village, which was peaceful when he was there, is now in a state of war and being attacked by another village. This village, they discover, is being armed by the Klingons for their own nefarious purposes. So Kirk decides the best thing to do is to arm the other village in order to balance the power in that current state. And there's a plot with Spock getting shot and having to be healed by Dr. Mbega, and there's a plot of Kirk being attacked by a college mascot creature and having to be healed by a witch doctor who is the wife of the Kirk's friend, and then she tries to betray them to the other village and she gets killed, and then the episode just ends. So yeah, I'm not a fan of this episode, as you can probably tell. And I mentioned this episode several times so far when I've been covering the episodes of Season 2, because particularly when I covered the episode Friday's Child, because I always, to be honest, when I was growing up as a teenager watching the original series, I always got these two episodes mixed up and confused. These were the boring episodes trying to be like a Western. And I don't like Westerns, and I don't like 60s Westerns, and I thought they were boring, and I thought both of these episodes were really boring and trying to be like Westerns. To be fair, I think this episode is worse than Friday's Child, because Friday's Child is actually kind of revered. Some people really like that episode, and is mostly looked at positively. I wouldn't say it's one of the most popular episodes of the original series, but it's definitely typically looked at favorably, something I really strongly disagree with. However, this episode is looked at very poorly, generally speaking, and for the most part, it is not a very well received episode. And honestly, I think the two are both very similar and both bad. But to be fair, I do think this one is worse, but not much worse. It's just only slightly worse, I think. And I think the main offense, in fact, I might not hate this episode as much as some other people do, because I think the main offense of this episode is that it's boring. I don't really care about what's going on. It has to say, I hate the Western setting, and there's a lot of hokiness that's 60s hokiness, such as having the witch doctor or whatever in her chant where she does to heal Kirk and has this root that shakes and he goes ah, and the guy was beating a drum to it. It was that scene was so dumb. I really don't like that. Was just, I really didn't like that kind of thing. And the plot, the whole character of her being a Lady Macbeth type, where she's just using him for power, her husband for power, and is constantly arguing and wanting them to make more power, and then at the end she betrays them and then is killed for it. It felt very hollow and very kind of cliche. I didn't have any attachment to that character whatsoever, and I didn't have any attachment to any of these characters. Why did all the people in the village that Kirk was friends with have these ridiculous blonde wigs? And on the other hand, the bad guys who were going around shooting people who were being armed by the Klingons, they all had brown or black hair. So what's that trying to say? Anyway, Yeah, and it's just ridiculous, and I never got into the whole Magatu creatures. They look like college mascots. I mean, seriously, like, I brought this up in my review for the Galileo 7, but the Galileo 7, you barely see the monsters, and they were kind of monstery looking, but this, you could flat out picture this Magatu at, you can just picture a college basketball game, and then you can see it right in the corner of like the court, like being the mascot, like going around doing a little dance, like the Magadu as it appears, like. Yeah, and to be honest, like, I wasn't a fan when Lower Decks brought these creatures back. That was that was a mediocre episode of Lower Decks as well. Like, I just don't, I wouldn't care to see them again because I didn't care about them. And the whole way, scene where it attacked Kirk was very, like, stereotypical. Ooh, Kirk's being attacked by the monster. And it's funny because there's two characters, Kirk and Spock, who both get injured in attack and have to be healed. Like, Spock gets shot in the back, and they have to have this thing with Dr. Mbega and freaking Nurse Chapel slapping him. Like, that scene was kind of boring. And I guess that's why I never, like, Dr. Mbega is a pretty cool character. I do think he is very different than how they portray him on Strange New Worlds. It does make me wonder when watching this, because Dr. Mbega is a doctor serving on the Enterprise, but McCoy is the chief medical officer in Strange New Worlds. Mbega is the chief medical officer, so what's going to happen to get him demoted? I wonder. That just had me thinking about that. Like, is Strange New Worlds going to address this, why he got demoted? But anyway, I mean, he seems a bit more like silly and jocular. Almost reminds me of Dr. Hibbert from The Simpsons. A bit more than Mbega, how he's portrayed in Strange New Worlds. But it was interesting seeing that they brought in another doctor because, they wanted to have both Kirk and Spock get injured at the same time, so they needed two doctors to try to heal them. Even though McCoy wasn't the one that really healed Kirk, it was actually the witch doctor doing her. And I do feel like, and I said this about Friday's Child, and I also say this about this episode. I know they're both trying to be Vietnam War analogies. This episode is more obvious as one than Friday's Child was, but they do invoke the image of Native Americans, and particularly how they were being portrayed in the 60s and Westerns in the 60s, which was by and large racist. That's how they were being portrayed. They weren't being portrayed very well, very fairly. I talked about this before, how I remember in the early 2000s, my mother was watching just some random 60s show on cable TV, and I just walked in the room and I saw the way they were portraying the Native Americans. They were unironically saying, "Me dumb savage, me no nothing." Of course, they're being played by white people. And so this is the kind of images this episode evokes to me, particularly that whole healing scene where they had the guy beating a drum, and having this witch sorcerer going, "Ah!" That does represent a lot of the ignorance and cliche that white America had about minorities, like not just Native Americans, but also thinking about all the Jamaicans and the voodoo thing craze or whatever. So I don't like it, and and don't get me wrong, as I said, I think this episode's worst offense is that it's boring. Like, I don't think it is as actively bad as maybe some other people do. I don't watch this episode and be like Cat's Paw example and being like, this is the dumbest crap I've ever seen. I'm just bored. I'm just not interested in any of the characters or any of the things that's going on. Kirk is injured. Whoop-de-doo. And then he's like enchanted by the witch doctor, where she like makes him like get all dopey and like, "Oh, I love you," and that's dumb. Like, And the plot's just not interesting, and the way the Klingons. Now, here's something I thought about the Klingons. Actually, I don't think they said Klingons in this episode. Maybe they did, and I just wasn't paying attention. But anyway, something about the Klingons, who, by the way, they're the guy who's obviously a white actor. His makeup is he's wearing dark makeup to make his skin darker. Anyway, I mean that's all I'll say about that. But anywho, and they didn't always do it with the Klingons. To be fair, I don't think they did this with Koloth and Trouble with Tribbles. My dear Captain Kirk. But anyway, so. Because I think in that episode they were trying to make them come off more as the Russians, where here I think they're trying to make them more come off as Chinese, because if I do believe that, the whole Vietnam War analogy. But anyway, so the Klingon is being like a mustache twirly bad guy, and who's the evil villagers with dark hair because it signifies they're evil because they're not blondes. I won't, the whole blonde hair, blue eye, who came up with it. But anyway, I'm not going to talk about that. Anyway, he tells him, he's like, oh, who should have this woman that we captured, because there's only one of her and we can't give her to every man. And the Klingon is like, oh, give her to the man who killed the most people. That's mustache twirly villain bullshit. And I don't know. I guess it was somewhat interesting, I suppose, having they do bring up kind of an interesting moral dilemma. They just don't execute it very well. Like the moral dilemma as of what how Kirk would respond to the Klingons invading a primitive pre-warp world, where they actually do bring up the Prime Directive several times in this episode, to be fair, which I kind of thought that they did. I thought they just blatantly violated. They kind of did by having Kirk, why was Kirk making friends and calling this guy brother with a pre-warp civilization? That seems it's kind of skirting that Prime Directive there. But other than that, they do seem to follow it, but he's in this, but of course Kirk actively breaks it against Spock and McCoy's recommendations and arms the other side. But it's an interesting dilemma, because the Klingons are completely skewing the they are interfering with this world, and so what Kirk is doing is kind of trying to counter that, but really, is he making it any better? And the answer is no. In fact, it does seem really out of character until you realize that this is supposed to be a Vietnam War analogy. And I think it's a very bad one. But when I was watching this episode, I was thinking about the Klingon and what was his motivation, because I was wondering, it seemed like, why is he helping this one village to giving them guns and helping them to conquer all the other villages? What's the point? I felt like he was just doing it for the fuck of it, and they never really explained it. Now, I did watch some reviews, and I saw this interesting explanation, which I don't know if it was just this guy coming up with the explanation, or if this was an official thing said by someone attached with the show. But he was saying that it was the Klingons' goal was to get this village or this faction to conquer the planet, or conquer all the other villages or countries or whatever, and take over the planet, and then install the leader of that village as a Klingon governor under Klingon rules, and then the Klingons would essentially rule that planet without having to devote much resources, because they just get the natives to do it themselves. Which, again, Vietnam War analogy coming in. Yeah, that's, I guess that makes sense, but this episode didn't really explain it. I felt like the episode didn't really, it got kind of vague, and The real thing is I felt like this episode didn't really have an ending. Now, there is one positive to the episode, which is this is apparently, and I looked this up on Memory Alpha, this is the only episode in Season 2 of the original series that did not end with this happy music. And I tell you how much I fucking hate those. Those jokes between Kirk and Spock and McCoy in the bridge. God damn it, I hate them so much. And thankfully they did not do it. In fact, the ending was kind of like bleak. It was kind of, this wasn't a tight, happy ending or tight, tied up all the loose ends. It kind of ended very ominously, very ambiguously, I would say. It didn't really have a firm ending. It was kind of left it open to whatever happened to these villages, but we never actually found out because nobody actually cares. Because this is boring, because it's uninteresting. But anyway, I actually see that as a negative, though, that the way the episode ends, because it ends kind of like abruptly. It's kind of like, it's kind of merciful because at least this boring episode's over and I don't have to endure it anymore, but it doesn't really have an ending. It's just like that witch doctor woman is killed and the what's-his-face vows to kill all the other villages and they're going to have this ongoing war. And I suppose if you're doing a Vietnam war analogy, because this episode aired before that war had concluded, and so the war itself is an ongoing thing that's lasting years, and so that's how they end this episode, that this is going to be an ongoing war that's going to last years, and was it a good thing? Really, I think that if this episode was being true to Starfleet and Federation lore, Kirk would have been court-martialed for doing what he did here. Especially, if you go into Next Generation. To be fair, I don't agree with the stance the Starfleet takes on the Prime Directive and later incarnations of Trek, because in Deep Space Nine, for example, in the Circle trilogy that starts Season 2, Sisko goes to the Starfleet Admiral, I think his name was Chakotay, not the same one. But anyway, he goes to Admiral Chakotay and tells him that the Cardassians are arming the rebellion, the anti-Federation rebellion on Bajor called the Circle, and they're like, oh, I thought the Circle hates Cardassians. How could they get on board with Cardassians? And he's like, well, they don't know it is the Cardassians. They think it's the Kursari, but secretly it's the Cardassians doing it in order, because they know if they chase the Federation away, then the Cardassians can come right back in and reconquer Bajor. And this Admiral Chakotay, his stance is, well, the Cardassians may want to interfere with other species, but we don't. So no, you can't do anything about it. Leave Deep Space Nine and let this happen because this is an internal conflict internal to Bajor. And that is a dumb ass fucking stance. That is a stupid stance. And so if they did have that same stance during this era when Kirk did this, he would be kicked out of Starfleet. He would be court-martialed. Like, how fucking dare you give these villagers guns, because the Klingons may want to interfere with this other world, but we don't. So they do, that's tough shit, tough titties, too bad. Let the Klingons do whatever they want, which is a stupid stance. Especially the whole Deep Space Nine scenario. That was, I think, plot contrivance. But anyway. But it's actually consistent. Throughout all of Deep Space Nine Next Generation, the Starfleet always has this ridiculous stance on the Prime Directive and taking it to an extreme, which is why I think a lot of fans, especially more modern times, that critique this era of Star Trek, hate the Prime Directive. I'm actually a fan of the Prime Directive, but only if it's implemented smartly and not dumbly, as it is in some of these examples. But for Symbiosis, for example, I think I agree with what Picard did, but that's something I'll get to later on. But yeah, in this stance, it seems like they should like do what they did in like Redemption, because when the Romulans were interfering in the Klingon internal conflict, their solution was to stop the Romulans from interfering, to put up a blockade. So I think that Kirk should address the situation head on. Like, they could use diplomatic channels, or they could use other things to try to prevent the Klingons from arming these people. Might be better than actually arming these people. But then if they did that, it wouldn't be a really good Vietnam War analogy, but it's already not, so I don't know. Anyway, I'm talking about other Trek and other episodes because this episode is boring. Anyway, so I think, yeah, that's pretty much all I got to say about this episode. So now, let me thank all of those who support me on Patreon. It is, of course, very much appreciated. The lifeblood of my channel, as I often like to say. So I'll just read out some of the names of those that support me. We have Kyrie091, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Brian A., Alessandro Miguelcio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neil Hales. Thank you all so very much for your support. Now we have a few patron comments on this episode that I shall like to read. First comment comes from Brandon Neil Howells that says, "A private little war. As ever, I have questions about this episode. If the society is a pre-warp stage, why is Kirk allowed to stay with Tyree 13 years prior to the episode? Why hasn't Tyree's camp moved in 13 years? Spock gets shot in the back, and soon he's moved to sickbay. He's placed in the bed on his back again. Mugatus are supposed to be nocturnal, so why do we see two of them in the daytime? Nona, damn, she's a distraction and no mistake. Why is she the only healer / witch doctor in the show? I'm never quite sure what she's after. It's hard not to laugh when she does her orgasmic healing dance with the rubber dog turd." To heal Kirk. Why does Scotty walk into sickbay just as Chapel is slapping Spock? I'll bet she was getting her rocks off as well. Poor Tyree can't have nice things because his evil woman put a literal spell on him. When Nona tries to take Kirk's phaser to headman of the village, she gets beaten, and if sure looks like sexual assault to me before getting killed. I'm not sure whether Kirk supplied better flintlocks to Tyree's people or not. Kirk's line, "We're very tired, Mr. Spock. Beam us up home," is the most depressed he's sounded since the end of City on the Edge Forever. I don't think this episode works without a follow-up, but maybe that's just me. This episode, while not nearly as heavy-handed as the Omega Glory, pretty much screams, "The Vietnam War is bad, McKay." It's too loud, too silly, and too unsubtle. 3 Mako roots out of 10. Now, one thing this comment touches on that I forgot to touch on was the fact that, yes, when the evil villagers attack Nuna, it does look like she is getting sexually assaulted, which is another thing I really didn't like. It seemed unnecessary and kind of gratuitous, and just, yeah, I don't like that scene at all. And also, putting Spock on his back, I didn't think about that. He got shot in the back, and they're gonna put him in sickbay on his back. But here's the thing: like, I don't know if this episode screams the Vietnam War is bad. I mean, I guess it does, but it seems like it's kind of like just trying to maybe justify it in some ways. It's kind of just like making an analogy to it, but it doesn't make that strong of a value judgment as some of these other episodes. I didn't even think about the Make It Glory, which, yeah, that is, oh god, that's actually much worse than this episode, but I'll get to that later. But anyway, next comment is from Ricky. This episode is crap. This premise makes zero sense. First of all, how in the hell was Kirk friends with the village leader 13 years ago when this is a pre-warp civilization? I mean, that is stupid. Then the Megado creature looks so dumb. It's a college mascot, man. Then Spock being shot in the back and is placed on his back in sick bay. And the whole witch doctor thing with her sudden change of plans against her people for no good reason. This episode is terrible, terrible, terrible. The one saving grace about this episode is seeing Dr. Moonbega as he's an interesting character who would go on to be on Strange New Worlds, but that's all I have to say. My rating is a 2 out of 10. Yeah, I think the motivation of Nona is that she's just seen as power hungry, and that's why it seems like she doesn't really have a love for her husband. It's not like a romantic relationship. She's just using him because he's the chief of that village, and so when she feels like she's not going to get the power she desires from him, and that's when she goes to try to get the power from the other people. But it's not a very good plot, so I will agree it is kind of muddy because this episode's not written well. So anyway, my rating for A Private Little War out of 10 is a 3. Very poor. Yeah, I don't think it's not the worst of the worst. Like, I wouldn't give it a 2 or 1. As I said, its biggest offense is that it's boring. There's a lot of things to complain about, like the Klingons acting like mustache twirly villains, the unnecessary sexual assault, which is just wrong, and the whole witch doctor thing with with the rubber turd and the mascot, college mascot looking thing going rah rah rah. Like, yeah, but for the most part, it's like, if you look at the plot, it was like mildly entertaining, I guess, and it's not the worst, most offensive thing the original series has done, in my opinion, but it's certainly boring as hell, and I think that is the worst offense, and I don't like Westerns. And this Vietnam War analogy is not done well. So, anyway, that is it for my review of A Private Little War. Now, coming up next on my channel next Monday, I shall review The Gamesters of Triskelion, and then Thursday, of course, another review for Star Trek Picard Season 3, and then on Saturday we'll return with another TOS review with Obsession. So that's what's coming up on my channel, so be sure to keep up with all that as I continue covering the original series and cover many more Star Trek videos and many other videos and many other shows. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.